Every day as the first light of dawn stretched across the sky, Sarah woke before the rest of the world. She did not need an alarm clock. Years of habit had trained her body to rise at the same moment, when the darkness softened and the horizon blushed with pale gold. For a few seconds she remained still beneath the covers, wrapped in warmth, listening to the deep, steady breathing of Mark beside her. The house was silent, the kind of silence that only existed before a family awoke. A silence full of promise. She slipped out of bed carefully so the mattress would not creak. The wooden floor felt cool beneath her feet as she pulled on her robe and moved toward the kitchen, the hallway dim and familiar. On her way, she paused outside the children's rooms. Lily had kicked her blanket off again, her curls fanned across the pillow like a halo. Ben slept on his stomach, one arm dangling toward the floor, his lips parted in a soft snore. Sarah smiled, a quiet, instinctive expression of love that no one saw. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and scooped fresh coffee into the machine. The first bubbling sounds and the rich aroma that followed were her true morning bell, signaling the start of another day. She opened the curtains to let in the early light, which painted the countertops in soft gold. This room was her sanctuary. Every corner held a memory. The scratch on the table from Lily's science project, the slightly crooked spice rack Mark had insisted on installing himself, the refrigerator door layered with drawings, schedules, and magnets from family trips. She moved through her tasks with a rhythm that was almost musical. Bowls were set on the table. Fruit was washed and sliced. Muffins she had baked the night before were arranged on a plate. Each motion was practiced, but never mechanical. For Sarah, these small acts were a language of care. When Mark finally entered, his hair rumpled and his eyes half closed, she had already poured his coffee the way he liked it. He kissed her cheek, and the simple gesture carried the weight of years spent together, years of building a life, of learning each other's silences and strengths. They spoke quietly, not wanting to break the fragile calm of the early hour. Sometimes they discussed practical things, bills, school meetings, a project at his firm. Other times they simply sat side by side, sharing the comfort of presence. These few minutes belonged only to them. Then, as always, the stillness burst into motion. Lily and Ben came charging down the hallway, their energy filling the house like sunlight. They talked at once, their words tumbling over each other, stories about dreams, reminders about schoolwork, questions about what was for dinner. Sarah moved between them with gentle efficiency, tying shoelaces, checking backpacks, wiping a smear of jam from Ben's cheek. There were moments of chaos, missing homework, a spilled glass of milk, a sudden argument over whose turn it was to feed the dog, but Sarah held it all together with a calm that seemed almost invisible. By the time Mark grabbed his keys and the children rushed toward the door, everything was in place. At the bus stop, the morning air was crisp. Sarah hugged the children tightly, breathing in the scent of their shampoo and fabric softener, memorizing them as if they might change between now and afternoon. She waved until the bus disappeared, her hand lingering in the air even after it was gone. The walk back home was always quieter. The same street that had felt lively minutes before now seemed wider, emptier. Inside, the house exhaled. This was the part of the day no one saw. Sarah tied her hair back and began the work that kept their lives running. Laundry was sorted into careful piles, whites, colors, delicates. The washing machine hummed like a steady companion. She cleaned the kitchen again, even though it was not truly dirty. Crumbs were swept away. Counters were wiped until they shone. She moved from room to room, restoring order. Beds were made. Curtains were opened. Toys were returned to their bins. It was not glamorous work, and there was no applause at the end of it, but there was satisfaction in the transformation from clutter to calm. Around mid-morning, she allowed herself a pause. On the back porch, she wrapped her hands around a second cup of coffee and sat in the chair Mark had built for her one summer. The garden stretched before her, alive with color. She had planted every flower herself, kneeling in the soil while the children played nearby. Now the blossoms nodded in the breeze, a living testament to patience and care. These moments of stillness were her private treasure. Here, she could hear her own thoughts. Sometimes she wondered about the life she might have lived, the career she had once imagined, the travels she had planned before Lily was born. The thoughts came not with regret, but with curiosity, like looking at an old photograph. Then a bird would land on the fence, or the wind would carry the laughter of children from down the street, and she would feel anchored again in the life she had chosen. The grocery store was its own small world. Sarah navigated it with a confidence born of repetition. She knew which cashier liked to chat, which aisle held the freshest produce, which brands were worth the extra cost. Her list was precise, a reflection of her quiet dedication to her family's health and happiness. Back home, she unpacked everything methodically. Vegetables were washed and chopped. Meat was marinated. Sauces were prepared and stored. She often experimented with new recipes, imagining the children's reactions, Mark's raised eyebrows of approval. Cooking was her art form, and the kitchen her studio. Lunch was simple and solitary. She ate at the table, the chair across from her empty, sunlight pooling on the surface. Sometimes she read while she ate. Sometimes she simply sat, enjoying the rare experience of uninterrupted thought. The afternoons belonged to the children again. Their return filled the house with noise and life. Backpacks were dropped. Shoes were kicked off. Stories poured out, about teachers, friends, victories on the playground, small disappointments. Sarah listened to everything, offering encouragement, guidance, and the occasional gentle correction. Homework time required patience. Ben grew frustrated with math. Lily worried about a class presentation. Sarah moved between them, her voice steady, her presence a reassurance. As evening approached, the kitchen came alive once more. Pots simmered. The oven glowed. The air filled with the layered scents of garlic, herbs, and baking bread. When Mark walked through the door, drawn by the aroma, there was a visible shift in his posture. Work fell away from him. Home gathered him in. Dinner was the heart of their day. Around the table they shared more than food. They shared themselves. Laughter rose and overlapped. Even the disagreements were softened by the ritual of being together. Later came baths, pajamas, and bedtime stories. These were Sarah's most cherished moments. The children's heads rested against her shoulders, their breathing slowing as the story unfolded. Sometimes she changed the endings to make them happier. Sometimes she invented entirely new tales. In those dimly lit rooms, her voice became a bridge between wakefulness and dreams. When the house finally grew quiet again, she and Mark sat together on the couch. The television played, but it was their conversation that mattered. They spoke of the future, vacations they hoped to take, changes they wanted to make, dreams that had evolved but never disappeared. By the time she went to bed, Sarah's body was pleasantly tired. As she lay beside Mark, she thought of the countless small things she had done that day, things no one would list, things no one would praise. And yet, her heart was full. Her life moved in circles, morning to night, season to season, but within that repetition was a deep and steady meaning. Every meal, every clean shirt, every story read aloud was a thread in the fabric of her family's life. Tomorrow, she would rise again before the sun. She would brew coffee and open the curtains. She would walk the children to the bus stop and wave until they were out of sight. And in the quiet that followed, she would once again build a day out of love. Not the kind that made headlines. Not the kind that demanded recognition. But the kind that endured, that nourished, that held everything together. And for Sarah, that was more than enough.